Hey guys, tonight we're going to step into a world where nothing stays the same for long, where the impossible becomes possible, and where laughter and mischief reign in the shadows. Tonight, I'll tell you the entire story of Coyote the Trickster, a character whose cleverness, curiosity, and wild spirit shaped countless adventures in Native American myth. Get comfortable. Tonight, you'll learn why Coyote is more than a troublemaker. He is a teacher, a creator, and sometimes a fool who helps the world find its way. If stories like this help you relax or drift off to sleep, please give this video a like. It means so much for the channel and helps others discover these gentle bedtime sagas. Let me know in the comments, have you ever outsmarted someone or maybe been tricked yourself? What's the funniest mistake you've ever made? Share your stories below. I read every comment. Now, let's open our minds to landscapes of sage and sky, empty deserts and endless forests, to a time before the world was finished, when all things were possible, and the most unlikely hero of all walked, ran, and tumbled across the earth. In the very beginning, when the world had just been born, nothing was settled, and nothing was quite as it seems. The land was raw and wild and beautiful, with mountains rising at the edge of the sky, rivers carving deep secrets through valleys, forests stretching toward the stars, and deserts shimmering with hidden heat. The animals could speak, and even the rocks and trees whispered ancient secrets. Creation was still happening, shaping itself in confusion and possibilities. Among all beings, no one was more unpredictable than Coyote. Some said he was brought to life by the sky people who wanted a bit of excitement in the world. Others believed Coyote simply appeared one dusk, trotting into the empty desert when everyone was distracted by the stars. Wherever he came from, Coyote was never just one thing. Sometimes he was a regular animal, hungry, curious, always on the hunt for food or fun. Other times, he seemed more like a spirit, able to change shape, talk to rivers, steal fire from the sky, or trick other powerful beings with a sly word and a sideways grin. Coyote was not the biggest or strongest animal. The bear was stronger, and the mountain lion faster in pursuit. The eagle could soar higher than anyone, and the snake knew secret paths beneath the earth. But none of them were as clever, unpredictable, or sly as Coyote. He was thin and scrappy, with a bushy tail, sharp eyes, quick paws, and a bark that could sound either like laughter or warning. He never stayed still for long and never let anyone tell him what couldn't be done. But you must remember this, Coyote was a creator as much as a trickster. Sometimes, through mistake or mischief, he taught important lessons. When Raven tried to hide all the sunlight, it was Coyote who figured out how to steal it back for everyone. When the animals argued over the best shape for the mountains, Coyote added a twist, making some hills smooth and others so funny-looking that everyone had to laugh and disagree. He was always at the center of things, stirring up trouble and helping the world find its balance, often by accident. All across Turtle Island, from the high Sierras, through the endless plains, to the forests of the Pacific Northwest, and deserts where Coyote's shadow stretched long at dawn, the people told stories about Coyote's adventures. Parents warned their children not to fall for Coyote's tricks, but laughed anyway whenever he got outsmarted by his own clever schemes. Elders told tales at the fireside, some cautionary, some hilarious, some full of wisdom disguised as foolishness. Coyote became an emblem of resourcefulness, resilience, and the wild freedom needed to survive in a world shaped by change. And so, the legend begins. Tonight, I will walk you step by step through the saga of Coyote's wildest adventures, from his very first mischief to how he made the world stranger, brighter, and better, even when everything he did seemed upside down. Because Coyote's story isn't just about trickery, it's about possibility, about seeing what no one else sees, asking the questions that no one else dares to ask, and making something out of nothing with a wink and a laugh. Settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin the adventure. In the early days, when the world was still young and unfinished, people lived in darkness and cold. Fire existed, but it belonged only to the fire beings who lived far away on a high mountaintop, jealously guarding their precious flames. These fire beings were selfish creatures who refused to share their warmth with anyone else. They built great walls around their fire and posted guards to watch over it day and night, making sure no sparks escaped to comfort the shivering people below. The animals and people suffered terribly without fire. They ate their food raw and cold. They huddled together for warmth during the freezing nights, their teeth chattering and their breath forming clouds in the bitter air. Children cried from the cold, and elders grew weak without the heat they needed to survive the harsh seasons. Something had to be done, but the fire beings seemed too powerful and too well protected for anyone to challenge. The animals held council meetings to discuss their desperate situation. Bear suggested they might attack the fire beings with brute force, overwhelming the guards with their combined strength. Eagle proposed flying high above the mountain and diving down to snatch the fire from above. Snake thought they could tunnel underneath the walls and steal the fire from below, but all of these plans seemed dangerous and likely to fail. The fire beings were not only selfish but also powerful and cunning. It was then that Coyote spoke up with his characteristic confidence. "I can get the fire," he announced, his tail wagging with excitement at the prospect of such an audacious trick. The other animals looked at him skeptically. Coyote was known for his clever schemes, but he was also known for getting into trouble and making situations worse rather than better. Many of them doubted that such an important mission should be entrusted to someone so unpredictable. But Coyote had already begun formulating his plan, and his eyes gleamed with the kind of mischievous intelligence that had gotten him out of countless scrapes before. "I won't fight them," he explained. "I'll trick them. I'll make them want to give me the fire." The other animals were intrigued despite their doubts. Coyote's tricks had worked before, and they were desperate enough to try anything. Coyote spent several days preparing for his mission. He gathered special materials from all over the landscape, certain types of wood that would burn easily, dried grasses that would catch fire quickly, and stones that would hold heat for a long time. He practiced changing his appearance, perfecting his ability to look innocent and harmless. Most importantly, he rehearsed the story he would tell the fire beings to gain their trust and get close to their precious flames. When Coyote was ready, he set out for the mountain where the fire beings lived. The journey was long and difficult, but Coyote was determined. He climbed steep cliffs, crossed rushing streams, and navigated through dense forests where the shadows seemed to whisper warnings about the dangers ahead. As he climbed higher and higher, the air grew thinner and colder, but Coyote pressed on, driven by thoughts of all the people and animals who were counting on him. When Coyote finally reached the fire being's stronghold, he was amazed by what he saw. The walls were even higher and more intimidating than he had imagined, and the guards were fierce-looking creatures with glowing eyes and sharp claws. The fire itself burned in the center of their compound, shooting flames high into the air and casting dancing shadows on the surrounding walls. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. But Coyote was not discouraged. He had come too far to give up now. He approached the main gate and called out to the guards in his most humble and respectful voice. "Great fire beings," he said, "I have traveled from very far away to see your magnificent fire. I have heard stories of its beauty, but the stories cannot compare to seeing it with my own eyes. Might a humble traveler be allowed to warm himself for just a moment?" The fire beings were suspicious at first. They had heard of Coyote's reputation for trickery and mischief, but Coyote seemed so tired and bedraggled from his long journey, so genuinely impressed by their fire, and so respectful in his manner that they began to feel flattered by his admiration. After much discussion among themselves, they decided to let him enter their compound, though they watched him carefully and kept their guards alert. Coyote spent the evening with the fire beings, praising their wisdom and power, admiring their beautiful flames, and telling them entertaining stories from his travels. The fire beings found themselves enjoying his company despite their initial suspicions. As the night wore on and they grew more comfortable with their guest, their vigilance began to relax. This was exactly what Coyote had been waiting for. As the night deepened and the fire beings grew drowsy from Coyote's entertaining stories and their own sense of security, Coyote watched carefully for his opportunity. He had noticed that one of the guards had been yawning frequently, and another kept nodding off during the longer tales. The fire burned lower now, though it still cast a warm, hypnotic glow across the compound. This was the moment Coyote had been waiting for. With movements so subtle they seemed accidental, Coyote began to edge closer to the fire. He stretched as if he were tired, yawned convincingly, and gradually shifted his position until he was sitting right beside the flames. The fire beings barely noticed, so accustomed had they become to his presence over the course of the evening. When one of them did glance his way, Coyote would make an innocent comment about the fire's warmth or beauty, deflecting any suspicion. Then, in one swift motion that took everyone completely by surprise, Coyote thrust the tip of his bushy tail directly into the flames. His fur caught fire instantly, but instead of crying out in pain or trying to extinguish the flames, Coyote leaped to his feet and bolted toward the entrance of the compound. The fire beings shouted in alarm and rage, finally realizing they had been tricked, but Coyote was already racing through their gate with his tail blazing like a torch behind him. The chase began immediately. The fire beings pursued Coyote with furious determination, their voices echoing across the mountainside as they called for his capture. They were fast and powerful, and they knew their mountain better than any outsider could. But Coyote had planned for this moment. He knew exactly which paths to take, which shortcuts would give him the greatest advantage, and where the most dangerous obstacles lay for his pursuers. Down the mountain Coyote ran, his burning tail leaving a trail of sparks and small flames in his wake. The fire beings followed close behind, their anger making them even more determined to recapture their stolen fire and punish the thief who had deceived them so cleverly. The chase continued through the night, across rocky ledges and through dense forests, with neither side willing to give up. But Coyote had not planned to make this journey alone. As he reached the halfway point down the mountain, he encountered Rabbit, who had been waiting in a predetermined location with fresh kindling ready to receive the fire. Coyote quickly touched his burning tail to Rabbit's bundle of dry grass and twigs, transferring the precious flames to his friend. "Run!" Coyote gasped, already exhausted from his flight but still determined to see the mission through to its conclusion. Rabbit took off like an arrow released from a bow, carrying the fire toward the next relay point, while Coyote continued running in a different direction to confuse the fire beings and draw them away from the real path of the fire. The pursuers had to make a split-second decision about which runner to follow, and in their confusion, they lost precious time that allowed both Coyote and Rabbit to increase their leads. Further down the mountain, Rabbit passed the fire to Squirrel, who scampered up into the trees where the fire beings would have difficulty following. Squirrel carried the flames from branch to branch, tree to tree, until he reached the next waiting animal. In this way, the fire was passed from creature to creature in a carefully planned relay that the fire beings could not stop or even fully understand. Each animal in the relay had been chosen for specific abilities that would help in this desperate race. Deer used his speed to cover open ground quickly. Bear used his strength to break through obstacles that might have stopped smaller animals. Eagle soared high above the landscape, carrying the fire where ground-bound pursuers could not reach. Snake slithered through hidden passages and underground tunnels, appearing and disappearing in ways that baffled and frustrated the fire beings. As dawn broke over the landscape, the fire had travelled far from its original home on the mountaintop. It had been divided and spread among many different animals, making it impossible for the fire beings to recapture all of it, even if they caught some of the carriers. The plan was working perfectly, but the mission was not yet complete. The final stage of the relay brought the fire down to the valleys where the people and animals lived in their cold, dark world. As the flames were distributed among the communities, cheers of joy and gratitude rose up to greet the morning sun. Children who had never known warmth gathered around the fires with wonder and delight. Elders wept with relief as heat finally reached their aching bones. The success of Coyote's audacious plan had transformed their world forever. As fire spread through the land, warmth and light transformed villages, valleys, and forests. People danced around their new flames, celebrating Coyote and every animal who'd helped in the fiery relay. Pots simmered with cooked food for the first time. Songs of gratitude filled the air. The story of Coyote's triumphant theft quickly turned into legend. Everyone reveled in the cleverness of the trickster who outwitted the powerful fire beings. But in the quiet moments after the celebrations, Coyote sat alone at the riverbank, nursing his tail. Even as a hero, he could not ignore the pain. The tips of his beautiful bushy tail were singed black, curled and scorched from his night's adventure. Coyote dipped his tail in the cool water, listening to the hiss and sizzle as the last embers faded. He winced but could not stop himself from grinning, proud of his cunning and happy for the world's new comfort. While Coyote rested, the animals gathered near him. Rabbit, squirrel, deer, bear, eagle, snake, and all the others who had carried the fire came together to see how their trickster friend was healing. Bear rumbled with approval, patting Coyote gently on the back. Eagle swooped down and offered a feather as a gift, a promise of blessings for Coyote's courage. Rabbit nuzzled Coyote's shoulder, whispering, "You really did it, didn't you?" Coyote kept his good humor, but the pain reminded him that every victory comes with a price. His tail, once a symbol of his pride and trickery, would forever bear the marks of the fire's bite. From this day forward, all coyotes would have tails with singed tips, a reminder to everyone of the story, the clever bravery, and the cost of seeking something that belongs to others. The fire beings, meanwhile, retreated to their mountaintop, furious and ashamed but lacking any power to reclaim what they'd lost. They cursed Coyote and warned that fire would always demand respect. "Let your children remember," they cried from high above. "Fire is your friend but never your servant. Treat it carelessly and it will bite you. Use it without gratitude and it will vanish." So it was said, and so it would be, for fire is quick to teach those who forget its dangerous beauty. In the years that followed, people and animals developed rituals to honor the fire. They learned that flames could cook, warm, and heal, but could also burn and destroy. Children were taught never to play carelessly with sparks. Adults gathered for ceremonies that marked the turning of seasons, using fire as a symbol of life's power, warmth, and renewal. Coyote, for his part, never lost his sly smile or his knack for stirring up trouble. Every time someone told the story of how fire came to the people, every time they looked at the tip of a coyote's tail or saw the crackle of red in the flames, they remembered the trickster's gift. They remembered that wisdom often comes from unexpected places, that rules are sometimes meant to be stretched, and that the world is richer because of those willing to run, leap, and risk their tails for the good of everyone. From that day on, fire lived not just in the hearts and hearths of the people, but in the songs, dreams, and laughter that Coyote left behind, always warming, always warning, always reminding everyone that no story is ever finished, especially when a trickster like Coyote walks the earth. Once the world was warmed by fire, Coyote grew restless. He wandered the wild places, rolling prairies, rocky canyons, lush riverbanks, always seeking the next challenge, always eager for mischief or adventure. His tail, singed but proud, was a badge of honor wherever he roamed. The other animals admired and sometimes feared him, knowing that trouble often followed wherever Coyote walked. One day, as Coyote trotted through a valley, he spotted a giant stomping across the land. This giant, enormous and clumsy, had legs as thick as ancient trees and a voice that boomed like distant thunder. Everywhere he went, the giant crushed the flowers, frightened the animals, and blocked the sunlight with his towering shadow. Deer fled at his approach, birds took shelter in the brambles, and even bear kept his distance. Instead of running away, Coyote studied the giant. He saw that the giant was powerful but not very smart, quick to get angry and slow to think things through. The other animals whispered to one another, "If anyone can outwit a giant, it's Coyote." But they worried too. If Coyote failed, the giant might rampage through the valley, leaving nothing but broken land behind. Coyote considered many plans. He wasn't strong enough to fight, he wasn't fast enough to outrun the giant's reach. But he was clever, and sometimes cleverness is the only thing that works against overwhelming force. As the giant sat by a river, bored and hungry, Coyote approached with his usual casual confidence. "Ho there, giant," he barked, tail wagging just enough to seem friendly. The giant peered down suspiciously. "What do you want, little Coyote? Shouldn't you be hiding?" Coyote shook his head, feigning innocence. "Why hide from such a mighty creature as yourself? In fact, I've come to offer you a feast. But not just any feast, a contest. Whoever eats the most can claim the valley as their prize." The giant's eyes gleamed. No animal had ever dared to challenge him before, and the idea of a feast excited his empty belly. "I accept," he roared, pounding his fists. "I'll eat you first, and then everything else." The birds and rabbits nearby shivered, but Coyote simply smiled. Coyote led the giant to a patch of juicy berries, plump and shining in the sunlight. "We start here," Coyote declared, and began to eat. He took only a few, making exaggerated noises as if they were unbelievably sweet and complimenting the giant on his choice of valley. The giant, pleased by the praise, gorged himself, eating so quickly that berry juice stained his giant hands and mouth. But Coyote's plan was more cunning. As soon as the giant stuffed himself full of berries, Coyote announced, "The real contest is not about eating, it's about dancing." And with that, Coyote sprang up and began to dance circles around the giant, singing a fast, tricky tune. The giant, confused but determined to win, tried to match Coyote's nimble steps. But with his enormous size and stuffed belly, the giant quickly grew dizzy and tired. Seeing his chance, Coyote encouraged the giant to try an even trickier dance, one that involved jumping over logs, spinning under branches, and twisting in crazy ways. The giant struggled to copy Coyote, stumbling and bumbling until he tripped over his own feet and landed in the river with a thunderous splash. The water rushed around him, tugging at his clumsy arms and legs. The other animals watched from the shore, their fear turning to laughter as the giant thrashed and flailed, unable to regain his footing. By the time the giant managed to scramble out of the river, half his berry feast had washed away, and he was tired, muddy, and defeated. Coyote pranced up, tail held high. "What a contest," he laughed. "You certainly made a splash, giant, but I think I'll keep the valley safe for the animals, just for now." The giant growled but couldn't argue. He was too exhausted, too embarrassed to challenge Coyote again. From that day forward, the valley was free from the giant's trampling. The flowers returned. The animals came out of hiding. Bear grumbled that tricks weren't as good as strength, but deer and rabbit sang Coyote's praises, grateful for the smart hero who had protected their home, not with violence or force, but with dancing, laughter, and just a touch of mischief. Coyote wandered on, always looking for the next adventure, knowing the world was safer and wilder with a trickster in its midst. After his victory over the giant, Coyote wandered farther than he'd ever traveled before. The lands of Turtle Island were wide and filled with wonders, forests so thick with trees that sunlight was just a rumor, deserts that breathed with winds carrying secrets, mountains topped by clouds, and lakes so deep even Coyote wondered what dreams might sleep beneath. Wherever he went, stories of Coyote's cleverness traveled ahead of him, and tales of his mischief lasted long after he was gone. One cloudless afternoon, Coyote noticed something strange. The rivers ran faster than usual, swollen by melting mountain snow. The wind carried warnings of distant storms, and even the elders of the woods, Ancient Bear, Wise Raven, and Clever Magpie spoke in whispers, uneasy. At night, the moon vanished behind heavy clouds, and thunder rolled above the world, louder every evening. Soon, rain began to fall. Not just showers or gentle drizzles, but relentless torrents, sheets of water pouring from the sky without pause. Day and night, rain hammered Turtle Island. Creeks became raging rivers, rivers overflowed and turned valleys into lakes. Animals scrambled for high ground, birds hurried to nest on cliffs and rocky outcrops. The world was drowning, and the old stories of a great flood seemed no longer a legend but a real and present danger. Coyote knew he had to act. He sprinted from village to village, warning every creature he found. "The world is changing," he howled above the storm. "The water is rising. Find safety quickly, or learn to swim." Coyote searched for a way to save as many lives as possible. On a bluff above the swelling river, he gathered representatives from every animal nation: bear, deer, fox, raccoon, turtle, otter, and more. The animals huddled beneath branches and rocks, shivering in the battering rain, looking to Coyote for a plan. "Some say I caused trouble," Coyote said with a sly grin, "but trouble is just opportunity in disguise. We must build something, something that floats, something that gives us time for the world to change back, if it ever does." The animals muttered among themselves. Some doubted Coyote's plan. Hadn't he tricked them before? But Otter perked up. "I can build with reeds and logs. Let's work together." So a raft was built, larger than any the animals had ever seen. Beaver gnawed thick trunks and lashed them together with strong willow branches. Squirrel and magpie carried leaves, moss, and bark to make soft places to sit. Deer brought food bundles of juicy berries and stashes of nuts, while bear swept away mud and leaves to keep the raft light. Otter engineered the raft's shape so it would ride high and steady even as the water kept rising. For days and nights they worked as a team, bickering, laughing, sometimes doubting, but always returning to the task, pushed by the voice of Coyote, who never seemed to tire, never seemed to lose hope. "We have to outwit the flood," he said. "We have to work faster than the rain and smarter than the river." At last, as the water licked the very edge of the bluff, the raft was finished. Animals scrambled aboard, making room for everyone. Those who could not swim, those who were too tired, even birds whose wings were soaked and heavy from days of rain. Coyote was last to board, his fur still wild and muddy, eyes bright with excitement and exhaustion. The raft floated free, spinning away from the land, carrying a living cargo of hopes, fears, and stories. All around, water covered what had once been forests and meadows. Sometimes bear would paddle with an oar made from a thick branch. Sometimes otter dove beneath the raft to check for leaks. Magpie flew low, scouting for dry land, while raccoon gathered anxious young animals and soothed them with nighttime songs. Days passed. The rain finally began to slow, but the world beneath remained an endless sea. Alone at night, Coyote stared up at the sky, wondering if Turtle Island was lost forever. The animals grew hungry, food supplies running low despite all their care and rationing. Coyote's confidence faltered. Would his trickster's luck run out this time? On the seventh night, as stars finally peeked through the thinning clouds, a small voice broke the anxious silence. Turtle, quiet and patient, who had remained calm through every wave and thunderclap. "I think," Turtle said, "there is earth beneath all this water. I remember stories, old stories about how land rose through water long ago." The animals looked at Turtle, hope flickering in tired eyes. "Let me dive," Turtle offered. "Let me try to find earth, just as Muskrat once did." The animals agreed, and Turtle disappeared into the dark water. For a long time, so long they feared he would never return. There was silence, but for the lapping of waves. Eventually, Turtle resurfaced, weary but triumphant. In his mouth he held a clump of mud, black and shining in the starlight. "There is earth," Turtle announced. "We can begin again." With this hope, the animals celebrated. They spread the earth carefully over the raft, and as dawn broke, the magic of the old stories returned. The raft grew solid, transforming beneath their paws and claws and hooves into new ground. Grass emerged, then hills, then forests and mountains, world shaped once again by the faith and effort of all, and by Coyote's leadership, for even tricksters sometimes must be heroes. In the aftermath, as the world dried and greened once more, the legend of Coyote and the Great Flood was told and retold. Some animals said Coyote had finally learned the value of working for others, not just himself. Others argued that his trickster spirit found joy in saving the world in the most unexpected way possible. Coyote simply grinned, looking down at his still scorched tail and out across the renewed earth, already plotting new adventures, new mischief, new lessons yet to come. After the flood, as new grass covered the revived earth and the survivors spread out once again, Coyote's restless nature would not allow him to settle quietly for long. Though he'd become a hero in the eyes of many animals, he was still, at heart, Coyote the Trickster, a creature defined by curiosity, irrepressible spirit, and an insatiable taste for trouble. And so, adventure called him onward, across plains and mountains, until one day he stumbled upon something truly extraordinary. In a hidden valley, Coyote came upon a large, peculiar rock. This rock was round and smooth, veined with mysterious patterns that shimmered whenever the sunlight hit its surface. Coyote sniffed it, pawed at it, and even gave it a bark to see if it would answer or move. To his amazement, the rock did seem to hum, a soft, throbbing sound, like the memory of thunder deep inside the earth. Coyote circled the rock, his imagination spinning. "A magic rock," he whispered, grinning. "What wonders might it hold?" He quickly got busy, poking and prodding, trying every trick he knew. When nothing obvious happened, Coyote did what he loved best. He began to boast. He spun a story about how, with his genius and cleverness, he'd soon uncover all the secrets of the stone, and that surely it would grant him whatever he wished. But the rock remained unmoved, humming softly, mysterious as ever. Frustrated, Coyote decided to test the magic of the stone. He remembered hearing that in old times, anything spoken to a magic rock might come true if you were brave or foolish enough to try. So Coyote lay his paw on the surface and said, "I wish for all the food in the world, so I'll never go hungry again." The rock shuddered faintly and, to Coyote's astonishment, a great pile of food appeared. Berries, nuts, dried fish, roasted rabbit, honeycombs dripping with golden sweetness. Coyote danced with delight. At last. No more days spent hunting or plodding through rain, no more clever tricks for dinner or scraps. Coyote feasted, shoveling mouthful after mouthful, licking sticky honey from his paws, his eyes rolling with pure joy. But soon his belly was full, so full he had to lie down and nap. When he woke, he tried wishing again, this time for the finest fur in the land, so all would admire him. Once more the rock shuddered, and golden pelts, dazzling and soft, tumbled around him in a shining heap. Delighted with his treasure, Coyote strutted across the hillside in his new fur coat, sure that every creature would whisper about his magnificence. That night, Coyote sang songs of his own greatness, boasting to the moon about how clever and lucky he was, how the magic rock had made him the richest and smartest of all animals. But, as the days passed, something strange began to happen. The pile of food spoiled and attracted swarms of flies. The golden fur grew patchy and lost its gloss. Worst of all, Coyote noticed that his friends, the very animals he'd once rescued from flood and famine, kept their distance, whispering behind bushes and darting away when he came near. At first, Coyote ignored this. Clearly they were jealous, or so he told himself. But without anyone to outwit, share a meal with, or laugh beside, the days grew long and lonely. Coyote tried one last wish. "Rock," he said, "bring me back my friends. I'd rather have their laughter and company than all the treasures in the world." Nothing happened immediately. But, as Coyote sat beside the silent rock, no longer humming, just still and ordinary, he heard footsteps. Rabbit, bear, fox, magpie, and others began drifting in, curious to see what Coyote was up to. Coyote looked at them, sheepish. "I was greedy," he admitted. "I thought the rock could give me everything, but it turns out everything without friends means nothing at all." Rabbit grinned. Bear rumbled with laughter. Magpie brought a small gift, a shiny pebble, and laid it at Coyote's feet as a sign of forgiveness and welcome. As the animals settled around him, sharing stories, jokes, and real food gathered together, the magic rock seemed to give one last, quiet hum note of contentment, as if it, too, had been waiting for Coyote to learn a different kind of lesson. From then on, Coyote never wished for riches or endless feasts. He learned, in his own trickster way, that true magic lies not in things, but in connection, mischief shared, and laughter echoing across Turtle Island. With the lesson of the magic rock still fresh in his mind, Coyote wandered beneath the endless sky, filled with the need to create and amuse, not just for himself, but for anyone who might be watching. Nights on Turtle Island were deep and dark. The moon hung shyly, and the only lights were fireflies drifting above riverbanks or sparks rising from campfires. Coyote gazed up one evening after the animals had eaten their fill and most had settled around the ashes of the night's fire. The darkness seemed too empty, too silent. Trickster though he was, Coyote also cared for joy and beauty. The world should be brighter, he declared to himself. Everyone should have something beautiful to look at while they rest. So Coyote crept away from the sleeping animals and set off into the unknown wilderness, determined, as always, to cause a little bit of change. He wandered until he caught the scent of something unusual, a sweetness that seemed to float on the breeze, shimmering at the edge of his senses. Guided by curiosity, he came to a hidden valley where, nestled among wild flowers and moss, he found a sack old and woven from threads of moonlight itself. It pulsed gently, like the heartbeat of the sky. Coyote's paws tingled with excitement. He sniffed the sack, tapped it, and finally gave it a nip. Out burst thousands of tiny glowing seeds that darted here and there, rising above the valley and scattering toward the endless arch of the sky. Each seed shone with a clear, pure light, small at first, then brightening, burning steady and sharp against the dark backdrop. He gazed upward, amazed. The darkness began to shimmer. The seeds settled in distant places, twinkling high above the world. Coyote leapt and howled with pure delight, dancing beneath the new lights, watching as they spread across Turtle Island, filling the night with shimmering points of hope, mystery, and possibility. Other animals woke and crept from their dens, drawn by the magic happening overhead. Bear blinked and rumbled, raven cawed, rabbit twitched his nose. "What have you done now, Coyote?" they asked, wide-eyed but amused. "I made the night beautiful," Coyote replied, his tail held high, the old burn marks catching silver from the new stars. "No more empty darkness, no more cold silence. Now every child, every elder, every creature can look up and know that there is always something bright, something worth chasing, something to dream about." But Coyote's trickster instinct would not let him rest. He grabbed a handful of extra seeds, deciding the sky could use a little more fun. Some he flung in clusters that shaped myths and pictures. A bear, a rabbit, his own winking face. Others he tossed carelessly, knowing the best surprises are those no one ever expects. Bear and rabbit gathered around, delighted but curious. "Some of those stars seem to move," Rabbit exclaimed, noticing a few streaks leaping across the sky. Coyote winked. "Let's call those shooting stars. If you see one, make a wish, just like I once did with my magic rock. Who knows what the night may bring?" The elders of Turtle Island soon noticed that the stars not only brought beauty, but also wisdom and comfort. The wise watched the patterns, reading omens for planting and hunting. Lovers traced the shapes in the sky, spinning new stories. Children counted the stars before sleeping, knowing that even in the biggest darkness there was always light to be found. Even the spirits paid attention. Old Turtle looked up and smiled, knowing Coyote had put his mark on the world yet again. Some say when the wind is right, you can hear Coyote's laughter gently echoing from star to star. And so, every night, as people and animals stretch out beneath the sky, the legend of Coyote sparkles overhead, reminding all that mischief, curiosity, and creativity can change the world in ways both beautiful and wild. For every star in the sky, there's a story Coyote's paws helped create, and every twinkle is a wink from the trickster, never quite finished, always looking for the next adventure to begin. After creating the stars, Coyote became something of a celebrity across Turtle Island. Animals would point up at the night sky and remember his wild creativity, his gift for turning emptiness into wonder. But fame, as Coyote soon discovered, came with its own complications. Everywhere he went, creatures expected him to perform miracles, solve problems, or create new marvels. Some days, Coyote loved the attention. Other days, he longed for the simple pleasure of wandering without anyone expecting magic. On one such day, when Coyote felt particularly restless and weary of expectations, he traveled to a remote canyon far from any village or gathering place. The canyon was deep and quiet, carved by an ancient river that now ran as just a gentle stream. Red rocks towered on either side, their surfaces marked by wind and time with patterns that looked almost like the writing of spirits. Here, Coyote hoped to find peace and perhaps a little ordinary mischief. Nothing grand, nothing that would add to his growing legend. But peace, it seemed, was not meant for Coyote that day. As he explored the canyon floor, stepping carefully among the scattered boulders and drinking from the clear stream, he heard something that made his ears perk up with curiosity. It was music. Not the singing of birds or the whisper of wind, but actual music with rhythm and melody and harmony. The sound seemed to be coming from the rocks themselves. Coyote crept closer, following the music to a clearing where a dozen large stones sat in a perfect circle. These stones were unlike any he had ever seen, smooth and rounded, each one a different size, but all of them glowing faintly with an inner light. As Coyote watched in amazement, the stones began to move. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed and grace, they rolled and spun around the circle, creating the most beautiful music he had ever heard. Each stone sang in a different voice, some high and sweet like birdsong, others low and resonant like distant thunder. For once in his life, Coyote was content simply to watch and listen. The dancing stones filled him with a sense of peace and wonder that he had rarely experienced. Their movements were hypnotic, their music soothing yet somehow exciting. He found himself swaying to the rhythm, his usual restlessness melting away in the face of such unexpected beauty. But as the music continued, Coyote began to notice something troubling. The stones seemed sad despite their beautiful song. Their dance, while graceful, had a melancholy quality, as if they were performing not from joy but from some deep longing or loss. Their inner light flickered sometimes, threatening to dim completely, and occasionally one of the stones would stumble in its dance, missing a step or falling silent for a moment. Unable to contain his curiosity, Coyote approached the circle cautiously. "Beautiful stones," he called out softly. "Your music is the most wonderful I've ever heard. But I sense sorrow in your song. What troubles you?" The stones slowed their dance and gradually came to rest, their music fading to a gentle hum. The largest stone, glowing slightly brighter than the others, spoke in a voice like distant mountains. "We are the dancing stones of the ancient canyon," it said. "For countless years we have danced and sung to keep the spirits of this place happy and the waters flowing clear. But we grow lonely, Coyote. We dance only for ourselves and the empty canyon walls. We long to share our gift with others, but we are bound to this circle, unable to leave our sacred ground." Coyote's heart was touched by their plight. Here were beings who possessed a gift as beautiful as any he had ever seen, yet they were isolated and forgotten, performing their wonders for no one but the wind and the stars. It reminded him of his own loneliness when he had wished for riches from the magic rock, but lost the friendship of other animals. "What if," Coyote suggested, his trickster mind already spinning with possibilities, "we could bring others to you? What if we could make this canyon a place where animals and people come to hear your music and see your dance?" The stones hummed with interest, their light brightening noticeably. "Is such a thing possible?" asked the largest stone. We have waited so long for company, for appreciation, for the chance to bring joy to others." Coyote grinned, his familiar confidence returning. "Leave it to me," he said. "I know a thing or two about getting attention." And with that, he set off on what would become one of his most elaborate and successful schemes. First, Coyote visited every animal community he could find, telling stories about the miraculous dancing stones he had discovered. But he was careful not to reveal their exact location immediately. Instead, he spoke in mysterious terms about a hidden canyon where music played itself and stones moved like living creatures. He described the beauty of their song and the grace of their movement, but always ended his tales by saying that such wonders were probably too difficult to reach, too dangerous to visit. This, of course, had exactly the effect Coyote intended. Animals who might have been mildly interested in seeing dancing stones became desperate to visit them when told it was nearly impossible. Bear declared he was strong enough to reach any canyon. Eagle insisted she could fly to places no ground-bound creature could manage. Rabbit claimed his speed would overcome any obstacle. Soon, a friendly competition developed among the animals to see who could first discover the location of the magical stones. Coyote's plan worked beautifully. Within days, animals from across Turtle Island were setting out on expeditions to find the mysterious dancing stones. Some traveled in small groups, others ventured alone, all of them driven by curiosity and the irresistible challenge Coyote had presented. The trickster himself watched from hidden vantage points as Bear lumbered through forests, sniffing for clues, while Eagle circled high overhead, scanning the landscape for unusual canyons. Rabbit darted from valley to valley, his nose twitching with excitement, and even the normally cautious deer left their peaceful meadows to join the search. But Coyote wasn't content to let the animals wander aimlessly. He began leaving subtle clues. A paw print in the mud near a stream that led toward the canyon, a small cairn of stones stacked in a particular pattern, the faint sound of distant music carried on favorable winds. He guided the searchers gradually toward their destination, making sure they felt the thrill of discovery while ensuring they wouldn't give up in frustration. Meanwhile, Coyote returned to the dancing stones to prepare them for their first audience in ages. "Company is coming," he announced to the circle of glowing rocks. "Are you ready to perform for the biggest crowd you've ever had?" The stones hummed with excitement, their inner light pulsing brighter than Coyote had yet seen. "We had been practicing," said the largest stone, "creating new songs, inventing new dances. We want to give our visitors something truly special, something they will remember forever." "That's perfect," Coyote replied. "But remember, not everyone who comes will understand your magic immediately. Some animals are skeptical by nature. Others might be frightened by things they've never seen before. Be patient with them. Let your music work its spell gradually." As the first groups of searchers began to converge on the canyon, Coyote positioned himself at the entrance, ready to serve as guide and interpreter. The first to arrive was a small party led by Fox, who had always been almost as clever as Coyote himself. Fox approached cautiously, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the canyon walls and the unusual acoustics that seemed to amplify every sound. "So, Coyote," Fox said with a sly smile, "you've led us on quite a chase. I hope your dancing stones are worth the journey." "Judge for yourself," Coyote replied, gesturing toward the inner canyon. As they rounded the bend and came upon the clearing, Fox and her companions stopped in amazement. The stones had begun their dance even before the visitors were fully in view, their music filling the canyon with ethereal harmonies that seemed to come from the rocks themselves. Fox sat down hard, her usual cleverness temporarily overwhelmed by wonder. Her companions, a young raccoon, 2 curious squirrels, and an elderly porcupine gathered close together, watching with wide eyes as the stones spun and rolled in their intricate patterns. The music wrapped around them like a gentle embrace, and soon they found themselves swaying to the rhythm, their earlier skepticism completely forgotten. More animals arrived throughout the day. Bear came thundering down the canyon trail, ready to be unimpressed, but found himself lying peacefully on his back, watching the stones dance against the backdrop of sky. Eagle landed on a high ledge and tucked her wings close, mesmerized by the precision of the stone's movements. Even Rabbit, who rarely stayed still for more than a few moments, sat quietly for hours, his usual restless energy calmed by the hypnotic music. As evening approached, the canyon was filled with creatures of all kinds. Families of deer grazed nearby, their young ones playing games inspired by the stone's dancing. Flocks of songbirds perched on the canyon walls, adding their voices to the musical harmonies. Beavers had built small dams in the stream to create better seating areas, while squirrels and chipmunks gathered nuts and berries to share with the other visitors. The dancing stones themselves seemed to grow more radiant with each new arrival. Their music became richer and more complex, incorporating rhythms and melodies that reflected the diversity of their audience. They danced with joy now, not sadness, their movements expressing pure delight in the company they had longed for so desperately. As night fell and Coyote's stars began to twinkle overhead, the gathering took on an almost magical quality. The stone's inner light grew brighter in the darkness, casting shifting patterns of illumination on the canyon walls. Their music seemed to rise up and mingle with the starlight, creating a symphony that included not just sound but light and movement and the very pulse of life itself. Coyote looked around at the peaceful assembly, natural enemies sitting side by side, young and old, sharing the same sense of wonder, creatures who normally lived solitary lives enjoying communal joy. His trickster's heart swelled with satisfaction, not because he had pulled off a successful prank, but because he had helped create something genuinely beautiful and meaningful. Old Turtle, who had made the long journey from his usual resting place, looked at Coyote with ancient, knowing eyes. "You did well, Trickster," he said quietly. "You took loneliness and turned it into community. You took hidden beauty and made it a gift for all." Coyote ducked his head modestly, but his tail wagged with pleasure. Around them, the dancing stones continued their eternal performance, no longer dancing in sorrow but in celebration, their music now a soundtrack for one of the most magical nights Turtle Island had ever known. The success of the Dancing Stones gathering filled Coyote with a deep satisfaction, but it also stirred up his restless nature in new ways. He had brought joy to others, created community where there had been isolation, and proven that his trickster talents could serve purposes beyond mere mischief. Yet as the days passed and life returned to normal rhythms, Coyote found himself gazing upward more and more often, watching the birds with a new kind of longing. Eagles soared high above the canyon, riding thermals with effortless grace. Hawk circled the meadows, seeing everything from his lofty perspective. Even the smaller birds, sparrows and finches and wrens, possessed something Coyote had never experienced, the freedom to leave the earth behind, to see the world from above, to travel through the vast ocean of air that stretched between ground and sky. "It's not fair," Coyote muttered to himself one morning as he watched a formation of geese flying south for the winter. "I can trick giants, steal fire from selfish spirits, create stars, and bring music to lonely stones. Surely I should be able to figure out something as simple as flying." The idea took hold of him with typical Coyote intensity. He began observing birds more carefully, studying the mechanics of their flight, the way they moved their wings, the angles they used to catch the wind. He paid attention to which birds were best at soaring, which excelled at quick maneuvers, and which could fly the longest distances without rest. His first attempts were, predictably, disasters. Coyote climbed to the top of a large boulder and leaped off, flapping his front legs frantically and expecting to soar away. Instead, he crashed into a bush, emerging covered with thorns and indignant at the failure of what seemed like such a simple plan. He tried jumping from higher rocks, running faster before his leaps, and even tying large leaves to his legs as makeshift wings. Each attempt ended in bruises, scratches, and wounded pride. The other animals watched these efforts with a mixture of amusement and concern. "Coyote," Bear said gently after witnessing a particularly spectacular crash, "perhaps some things are not meant for land creatures. We each have our own gifts. You have cleverness, speed, and cunning. Birds have flight. Isn't that enough?" But Coyote's determination only grew stronger in the face of skepticism. If others thought it was impossible, that made the challenge even more appealing. He began approaching the birds themselves, asking for flying lessons and advice. Most birds were polite but unhelpful. They had learned to fly as chicks and couldn't really explain how they did it. It was as natural to them as walking was to Coyote. However, Raven, who had always been drawn to clever and ambitious creatures, took pity on Coyote's plight. The problem, Raven explained, is not just the mechanics of flying. It's understanding the air itself. You treat the air like empty space, but it's not. It has currents and temperatures, pressures and densities. It's as real as water or earth, but you can't see it. This insight intrigued Coyote immensely. He began spending hours standing perfectly still in windy places, feeling the air move across his fur, trying to understand its patterns and moods. He noticed how it behaved differently near rocks and trees, how it changed with the time of day and the weather. Slowly, he began to develop what birds took for granted, an intuitive sense of the invisible medium through which they moved. Raven continued to mentor him, teaching him about thermals, rising columns of warm air that could lift a creature higher without any effort. She showed him how to recognize updrafts near cliffs and downdrafts in valleys. Most importantly, she taught him that flying was as much about patience and timing as it was about strength and technique. "Watch," Raven said one afternoon, positioning herself at the edge of a high cliff. Instead of flapping vigorously, she simply spread her wings and waited. A gust of wind came up from the valley below, and she leaned into it, allowing it to lift her into the air. She rode the current effortlessly, making only small adjustments with her wingtips, her body perfectly relaxed and confident. Coyote studied this demonstration intensely. He began to understand that his frantic flapping and desperate leaping had been exactly the wrong approach. Flying required a kind of partnership with the air, a willingness to trust forces beyond his direct control. Armed with this new understanding, Coyote modified his approach completely. Instead of trying to force his way into the air through sheer determination, he began looking for the right conditions, the perfect combination of wind and thermal activity that might, just might, give him the lift he needed. The opportunity came during a particularly blustery day in late autumn. Coyote positioned himself at the edge of the same cliff where Raven had given her demonstration, feeling the air currents with his newly educated senses. A powerful thermal was building below, and the wind was coming from exactly the right direction. All his instincts told him this was the moment. Coyote spread his front legs wide, closed his eyes, and leaped. But this time, instead of flapping frantically, he held himself perfectly still, trusting the air to carry him. For a moment that lasted an eternity, he felt himself suspended between earth and sky, neither falling nor rising, simply existing in the realm of air that he had worked so hard to understand. Then the thermal caught him. He felt himself rising, actually rising, lifted by invisible hands toward the clouds. His eyes flew open in amazement and joy as the ground fell away beneath him. He was flying, truly flying, soaring on the wind like the birds he had envied for so long. The flight lasted only a few minutes before Coyote's inexperience caused him to lose the thermal and glide ungracefully to earth. But those few minutes changed him forever. He had touched the sky, had seen Turtle Island spread out below him like a vast, living map, had experienced the incredible freedom that came with breaking the bonds of gravity. Word of Coyote's successful flight spread quickly across Turtle Island. Animals who had dismissed his attempts as impossible foolishness now gathered to witness this unprecedented achievement. Even the birds, initially skeptical that any land creature could master their ancient art, came to watch with grudging respect and curiosity. Coyote, never one to shy away from an audience, began giving flying demonstrations that drew crowds from far and wide. But success, as Coyote had learned before, brought its own complications. His initial flights had been pure joy, the simple pleasure of soaring above the familiar landscape, seeing his world from an entirely new perspective. Now, with spectators expecting ever more impressive performances, Coyote felt pressure to push his abilities further and further, to attempt maneuvers that even experienced birds found challenging. Raven, who had become something of a mentor to Coyote, watched these developments with growing concern. "Flying is not a performance," she warned him one afternoon after he had attempted a particularly reckless diving spiral that nearly ended in disaster. "It's a partnership with forces much larger than yourself. The air will teach you humility if you let it, or it will enforce humility if you don't." But Coyote, intoxicated with his new ability and the admiration it brought him, found it difficult to heed such warnings. He began attempting flights in increasingly dangerous conditions, during storms, at night, in the treacherous winds that howled through narrow canyons. Each successful flight boosted his confidence and encouraged him to take even greater risks. The animals below watched these aerial adventures with a mixture of awe and anxiety. Bear shook his massive head, muttering about the folly of creatures who refused to be satisfied with the gifts they were born with. Rabbit admired Coyote's courage but worried about his growing recklessness. Even Fox, who appreciated cleverness and ambition, began to suspect that Coyote's flying obsession was leading him away from the wit and wisdom that had always been his greatest strengths. It was during one of these increasingly ambitious flights that Coyote made a discovery that would change not only his own life, but the lives of all the creatures of Turtle Island. While soaring high above a remote mountain range, riding thermals that carried him higher than he had ever flown before, Coyote spotted something that made his keen eyes widen with amazement. Nestled in a hidden valley between the peaks was a village unlike any he had ever seen. The dwellings seemed to be made of crystallized light, their walls transparent but somehow solid, refracting sunlight into brilliant rainbows that danced across the valley floor. Beings moved through this village, creatures that looked somewhat like people but seemed to be made of the same crystalline light as their homes. Coyote circled the valley several times, studying these strange beings and their impossible architecture. The more he watched, the more convinced he became that he had discovered something extraordinary. A community of sky people, perhaps relatives of the legendary beings from whom Sky Woman had fallen in the ancient stories. These creatures moved with an ethereal grace, and everything they touched seemed to shimmer with an inner radiance. Unable to contain his curiosity, Coyote began a gradual descent into the valley. But as he drew closer, the air around the village seemed to thicken and become resistant to his movements. The thermal currents that had carried him so high suddenly disappeared, and he found himself struggling to maintain altitude. It was as if the very atmosphere around the Sky People's village was different, governed by laws that didn't apply to the ordinary world below. Coyote managed a rough landing on a ledge overlooking the village, his usual grace abandoned in favor of simply avoiding a catastrophic crash. From this vantage point, he could observe the Sky People more closely, and what he saw filled him with wonder and perplexity. These beings seemed to exist partially in the physical world and partially in some other realm. They walked on solid ground but occasionally seemed to fade or become translucent. They handled objects that appeared real but sometimes passed through their hands like mist. One of the Sky People noticed Coyote's presence and approached the ledge where he crouched. This being was tall and graceful, with features that shifted subtly like reflections on moving water. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind chimes mixed with distant thunder. "Greetings, Earthwalker," the Sky Person said. "It has been many seasons since one of your kind has visited our realm. Your determination to reach us shows great spirit, though your flying technique could use refinement." Coyote bristled slightly at the criticism but was too fascinated to take real offense. "I taught myself to fly," he said proudly. "No Earth creature had ever done it before." The Sky Person smiled, an expression that seemed to involve not just its face, but its entire luminous being. "We know of your achievements, Coyote the Trickster. Your reputation reaches even here, in the places between Earth and Heaven." But flying is only the beginning of what you might learn if you are willing to listen rather than simply striving to impress. This comment struck Coyote with unexpected force. He realized that in his excitement over mastering flight, he had indeed been focusing more on spectacular demonstrations than on understanding the deeper mysteries of the air and sky. Raven had tried to tell him this, but he had been too caught up in his own success to really listen. "What could you teach me?" Coyote asked, his voice uncharacteristically humble. "The sky holds many secrets," the sky person replied. "Weather patterns that can be read like stories, wind currents that connect distant places, the language of clouds and the songs of storms. But such knowledge comes only to those who approach the sky with respect rather than conquest, with curiosity rather than vanity." Coyote considered these words carefully. His trickster nature rebelled against accepting instruction, but his deeper wisdom recognized the truth in what the sky person was saying. He had learned to fly through determination and observation, but there was clearly much more to master. Coyote lingered in the shadow of the crystalline village, longing to understand both its shimmering secrets and the wisdom of the sky people. The being who had welcomed him did not turn him away, but set him a challenge that appealed to both his pride and his curiosity. "If you wish to learn," said the sky person, "leave aside your need to impress. Observe as a child does, without agenda. Listen for the hidden languages spoken by the winds, clouds, sun, and stars. Stay until you hear what cannot be spoken with words alone." And so Coyote did something rare. He grew quiet, still, almost invisible in his concentration. Day after day he watched as the sky people moved, sometimes interacting, sometimes simply standing in harmony with the air, as if listening to music no one else could hear. Coyote imitated their patience. Instead of leaping and bounding, he let the wind tug gently at his fur. He lay on his back and watched the sky for hours, studying how tiny changes in the shape and color of clouds foretold the coming of rain, wind, or sun. He learned to feel the subtle shifts in temperature on the breeze, the prickling of his whiskers when thunderstorms approached, and the hollow ring of stillness before dawn. Coyote memorized the patterns of birds in flight, how their formations changed with the seasons and the weather. He noticed how the sky people would sometimes gather in silent circles, touching the ground and raising their faces in silent prayer when the winds grew wild. In these quiet, watchful days, something new awakened in Coyote, a sense of belonging to something immeasurably vast and mysterious. His mischief softened into awe. His pride faded into reverence. When the sky person saw that Coyote was truly ready, they shared more direct teachings. "Air carries messages," the sky person explained on a morning when the breeze was gentle and the clouds moved in long, twining spirals. A whiff of coming rain, the rising thermals that lift birds and seeds alike, the deep hush that falls before a great change, these are more reliable than any spoken promise. Many Earth dwellers forget that the sky is alive. To truly fly, to truly thrive, you must learn this language. In the evenings, the sky people taught Coyote the songs of the constellations, how certain star patterns foretold important events, marked times for planting or traveling, and held the memory of journeys across Turtle Island. They showed him how to interpret halos around the moon, count the seconds between a lightning flash and a thunderclap, and sense the moment when fog holds secrets or danger. By day, Coyote joined in silent rituals that honored both earth and sky, blending movement and stillness in a dance of preparation for big weather. The sky. People did not give him powers or magic. Instead, they nurtured his natural cleverness until it was attuned to things that could not be tricked or hurried. At last, when the time came for Coyote to depart, the sky person who had been his main teacher offered a last bit of advice. "The sky will always welcome you, Coyote, if you remember to listen first, act second. Your gift is not only in laughter or cunning, but in seeing the patterns others overlook. Teach what you have learned to those on the ground. Let them know the sky is a partner, not a memory or a threat." Coyote bowed low, full of gratitude. He ran down from the mountains renewed, his flying more skillful, his spirit more peaceful, the sky's lessons written inside him. Wherever he went after, Coyote shared what he knew, pointing out the signs of changing weather, showing children how to read the sunrise and find their way by starlight, telling all who would listen that the sky, like the earth, had its own wisdom, kindness, and moods. Animals and people remembered that after all his mischief, all his tricks and adventures, it was Coyote who reminded them to look up, not just for answers, but for beauty and belonging, forever part of the endless conversation between the land beneath their feet and the wind above their dreams. When Coyote returned from his time with the Sky People, he brought with him not only new wisdom about wind and weather, but also a deeper understanding of how all things in the world were connected. The sky spoke to the earth through rain and snow, the earth answered back through rivers and streams, and everything flowed in great cycles that had been turning since the beginning of time. This newfound awareness made Coyote more attuned to the subtle voices of the landscape, and it wasn't long before he heard something that troubled him deeply. The rivers were whispering of sorrow. At first, Coyote thought he might be imagining things. After all, his experiences with the sky, people had opened his senses to new kinds of communication, and perhaps he was simply hearing the normal sounds of flowing water in a different way. But as he travelled along the banks of streams and rivers throughout Turtle Island, the whispers grew clearer and more distinct. The waters were singing songs of loss, of something precious that had been taken from them. Intrigued and concerned, Coyote began following the largest river he could find, walking upstream toward its source in the distant mountains. As he travelled, he listened carefully to the water's voice, trying to understand what had gone wrong. The river spoke of a time when its waters had run clear and pure, when fish swam in great schools and water spirits danced in every eddy and pool. But now, the river said, something was blocking its flow, stealing its power, and driving away the spirits that had made it truly alive. After many days of travel, Coyote reached a narrow canyon where the river's voice changed dramatically. Instead of the flowing melody he had been following, the water here gurgled and choked, as if struggling to breathe. Rounding a bend in the canyon, Coyote discovered the source of the problem. A massive boulder had fallen from the cliff above, nearly blocking the river's passage. Water backed up behind the obstruction, forming a stagnant lake, while only a trickle managed to squeeze through the small gap that remained. But this was not simply a case of a natural rock slide. As Coyote examined the boulder more carefully, he realized it was covered with strange markings and seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. This was no ordinary stone. It had been placed here deliberately by some powerful force that wanted to control or capture the river's flow. While Coyote pondered this discovery, the water around the boulder began to shimmer and dance. Gradually, shapes emerged from the trapped river, translucent figures that moved with the fluid grace of flowing water but had distinct personalities and voices. These were the river spirits, the guardians and embodiments of the waterway's life force. Coyote, called the largest of the spirits, its voice like the sound of water running over smooth stones. "We have been hoping someone would come. We cannot move this cursed boulder ourselves. It was placed here by the thunder beings, who grow jealous of our power to bring life to the land. They want to keep all the water in the sky, leaving the earth dry and barren." Coyote's eyes flashed with indignation. He had great respect for the thunder beings and their role in bringing rain, but this seemed like a cruel abuse of their power. Why would they do such a thing, he asked. Another spirit, smaller and quicker, rippled with agitation as it spoke. "They say we give too much life to the earth creatures, that rivers make the land too green and fertile. They want the world to depend entirely on their rain, to worship only the sky and forget the importance of flowing water. But without rivers, the rain they send simply runs away to the sea. The land becomes a desert, and all the connections between sky and earth are broken." Coyote understood the problem immediately. This was another case of imbalance, like the selfish fire beings who had once hoarded all the warmth. The thunder beings had forgotten that their power was most meaningful when it worked in harmony with other forces, not when it dominated them. Someone needed to remind them that cooperation created more beauty and abundance than competition ever could. But moving a boulder placed by the thunder beings would be no simple task. These were among the most powerful spirits in the sky, capable of shaking mountains with their voices and splitting trees with their lightning. Coyote could not simply trick them the way he had outwitted the fire beings or the giant. This situation would require all his cleverness, plus some of the patience and wisdom he had learned from the sky people. "I'll help you," Coyote promised the river spirits, "but it may take time and the solution might not be what any of us expect. Are you willing to trust me, even if my methods seem strange?" The spirits swirled together in consultation, their forms blending and separating like water finding its way around obstacles. Finally, their spokesman spoke for all of them. "You freed fire for all the world. You brought the stars to light the darkness, and you learned to fly when no earth creature had ever done so before. If anyone can solve this puzzle, it's Coyote the Trickster. We trust you." With this vote of confidence, Coyote began to formulate a plan. But instead of rushing into action as he might have done in his younger days, he first spent several days observing the situation carefully. He studied the boulder, noting exactly how it had been positioned and what kinds of markings covered its surface. He listened to the flow of the blocked water, understanding how the river's power was being redirected and contained. Most importantly, he watched the sky, learning the patterns of the thunder beings' movements and the rhythms of their activities. During this observation period, Coyote also spent time with the river spirits, learning about their relationship with the thunder beings in better times. It turned out that the two groups of spirits had once worked closely together, the thunder beings providing the rain that fed the rivers, while the river spirits carried that water to every corner of the land, nourishing all forms of life. Their conflict was relatively recent, born of a misunderstanding that had grown into resentment and then into this destructive competition. Armed with this knowledge, Coyote began to see a way forward that might satisfy everyone involved. Coyote spent his days devising the perfect plan, not a trick for the sake of laughter, but a clever solution that would heal the rift between thunder beings and river spirits. He understood now what he had learned from the sky. People, the best magic is not about domination, but about connection and understanding. First, Coyote called upon the animals across Turtle Island. He explained the peril the rivers faced and asked for help from those whose lives depended on water. Beaver, master builder, rallied her family to tunnel and dig, loosening earth around the massive boulder. Bear used his brute strength to roll smaller stones away, opening new routes for water. Woodpecker and magpie flew word to every corner, summoning creatures who could lend paws, claws, and wings. While the animals worked below, Coyote set out to meet the thunder beings. He waited on an exposed hillside whenever storm clouds gathered, letting lightning crackle nearby and rain soak his fur. Eventually, the thunder beings descended, towering, shimmering forms with eyes like electrical storms and voices strong as roaring wind. "Why have you come, Earth Trickster?" boomed the largest thunder being. Coyote bowed respectfully, remembering the lessons of humility. "I seek balance. Once you gave rain, the rivers carried it to all life. Now you keep your water in the sky and the earth suffers. Are you not tired of endless struggle?" The thunder beings rumbled in reply, their pride wounded, but their curiosity piqued by Coyote's reputation for cleverness. "We wish to be respected by those below. We do not wish to be forgotten." "You are respected," Coyote assured them. "No one forgets the power of storm, the gifts of rain, the beauty of thunder. But the rivers and the ground must also be honored, or your gifts will have nowhere to flourish. There is no victory in draining the earth or drying the streams. There is only loss for everyone." Moved by Coyote's words, and perhaps by a secret yearning for harmony, the thunder beings agreed to meet with the river spirits. Guided by Coyote, both groups gathered at the edge of the blocked canyon where water still pleaded for release. Coyote asked them all to share stories, memories of the earliest rains and floods, times when rain and river helped restore lost forests, when fish migrated from ocean to stream, when the sky and water worked together as one. The spirits remembered old ceremonies held at waterfalls, lightning dances that coincided with snowmelt, and shared sustenance that brought abundance to every living thing. The bitterness began to fade. Slowly, the thunder beings and river spirits recognized their intertwined destinies. Coyote stepped back, letting their memories and stories do the magic. "Perhaps the boulder that separates you is only a test," he suggested. "If you can work together, you can move mountains, you can restore the world." Inspired, the thunder beings sent down a mighty rain, not to flood or destroy, but to soften earth around the boulder. The river spirits called forth every stream, joining their waters to push together. Beaver, bear, deer, and otter pressed from all sides. Even the wind itself, steered by the thunder beings, lent force to the effort. With a great rumble and splash, the boulder shifted, rolled aside, and the river rushed free. Water poured renewed and strong, feeding valleys, lakes, and forests. The river spirits danced in joy. The thunder beings crackled with pride, delighted by their power not to dominate, but to bless. All the animals cheered. Coyote howled in triumph, not for trickery, but for wisdom and unity. Afterwards, a great feast spread across Turtle Island. Rivers ran clear, and every animal, plant, and spirit came to drink. The thunder beings watched as new ceremonies honored both the rain in the sky and the waters on the earth. The river spirits welcomed visitors, sharing stories and blessings at the banks. Coyote wandered from stream to stream, smiling at the harmony he had helped restore. He understood now that the best tricks didn't divide, but connected, that true magic wasn't about winning, but about healing what had been broken. And as always, when the work was done and balance returned, Coyote disappeared into the dusk, still searching for the next lesson, the next mischief, the next story to shape the world. After restoring the rivers, the legend of Coyote grew deeper among the animals and spirits of Turtle Island. Everyone agreed. Coyote's cleverness didn't just bring laughter, it brought new balance and hope. But Coyote himself felt the familiar itch of curiosity, knowing that the world's mysteries were endless. As autumn ripened and the nights grew longer, he began to wonder about something he'd often noticed on his travels, the ever-changing face of the moon. To Coyote, the moon was a friend and a puzzle. He had sung beneath its silver glow and watched its phases mark the passage of time. He'd seen it rise huge and yellow over the desert, dip red and cold behind black forests, and sometimes slip away entirely, leaving only stars. But what truly captivated him was the moon's strange shadow, the dark veil that crossed its face during eclipses, making even the bravest animals shiver with ancient dread. One cool evening, Coyote climbed to the highest ridge he could find, determined to solve the mystery of the moon's shadow. As he sat alone, he spoke gently, calling out to the moon. "Beautiful moon, why do you sometimes hide your face? What is the shadow that comes between you and the world?" For a long while the night was silent, but then, in the hush between wind and heartbeat, the moon answered in a voice both distant and near. "Coyote, trickster, seeker, my shadow is part of a greater story. Each month the earth rises between me and the sun. The shadow you see is not danger, but passage, a time when memories are woven, secrets revealed, and new stories born." Coyote pondered this, feeling the pull between sun, moon, and earth. "Is the shadow a curse?" he asked, "or a blessing?" The moon glowed brighter, its face soft and welcoming. "Shadow is neither curse nor blessing. It is necessary, a space for change, a reminder that light and darkness dance together. In the shadow, dreams grow, and old things rest until it's time for them to shine again." Moved by this wisdom, Coyote decided to share what he had learned. He gathered the animals for a moonlit assembly. Bear, deer, fox, owl, rabbit, and even shy creatures came, curious about what Coyote would say. When the moon passed through another shadow, the whole assembly watched, some afraid, others mystified. Coyote spoke to everyone, his voice gentle yet clear. Don't fear the shadow. It's a gift, a chance to slow down, listen, remember, and imagine. When the moon disappears for a night, sit quietly, sing ancient songs, celebrate hidden dreams, and honor the dance of darkness and light. The animals carried these words back to their homes. On every eclipse they created new ceremonies, singing lullabies, crafting moon-shaped tokens, sharing stories of bravery found in the quietest moments. Coyote's lesson helped children sleep easy, and elders remember wisdom carried in both bright and dark. Coyote, now known as a teacher of both mischief and meaning, watched his world with new satisfaction. He could still play tricks, but he understood that every joke held a seed of truth, and every mystery hid a lesson for those patient enough to ask. And when the moon threw its shadow once more, Coyote sat on his ridge, still learning, still listening, knowing that every question led to another adventure, and every shadow was a doorway to deeper magic. Seasons passed, and the world of Turtle Island shifted as it always did. Now, after the questions of river, sky, and moon, Coyote became fascinated by the quiet power of dreams. Each night, as he curled up beside a fire or under the shelter of a lone pine, Coyote noticed that dreams pulled him, and all creatures, into realms of mystery, a world where anything could happen, and where the truths of waking life sometimes danced in disguise. On his travels, Coyote met people and animals troubled by their dreams. Some feared the strange visions, chasers lived again, voices out of memory, creatures long gone now returned. Others relished the power of dream, claiming it gave them messages, omens, or courage they couldn't find by day. Owl, with her wide, seeing eyes, told Coyote, "Dreams are how the night speaks. Ignore them, and you miss half the world's guidance." Coyote had never been one to ignore anything interesting, so one crisp evening he made up his mind to discover the secrets of the dream world. He found a quiet clearing lit by stars and moon and called upon Dream whoever or whatever ruled the sleeping minds of all beings. His call was gentle, but it carried to every corner of the world. In his sleep, Coyote drifted into a vision. There he met the spirits of dream, shapeshifters who wore many masks, sometimes animals, sometimes people, sometimes flashes of color or bursts of sound. These spirits welcomed Coyote, for he too was a shapeshifter, at home in a world where nothing stayed fixed. "Why do we dream?" Coyote asked the spirits. They sang and danced around him, their voices layered and strange, blending questions with answers. Dreams are for remembering, for warnings, for hope, for lessons you can't learn when your eyes are open. They show what is lost and what is possible. Dream is the place where the story grows new. Coyote watched as dream spirits wove together scenes from his life, the theft of fire, the soaring flights, the music of stones, his conversations with river and sky. All these moments returned, sometimes backwards or upside down, sometimes with new endings or answers to questions he'd forgotten to ask. When he finally awoke, Coyote felt filled up from the inside, as if he'd drunk from a deep, ancient well. He carried the wisdom of dreams with him and shared it with others as he wandered. When Bear complained of troubled sleep, Coyote taught him to listen to his dreams and to sit by water at dawn to let them pass gently away. When a young fox dreamed she was being chased by her own shadow, Coyote showed her how to turn and dance with it instead. He led ceremonies where families slept in circles on soft grass, telling dreams at sunrise, a practice that spread from one den to the next. Soon, the creatures of Turtle Island learned that dreams were nothing to fear, but messages wrapped in mystery, gifts from the spirit world or from their own deeper hearts. With Coyote's help, they honored the language of dreams, making new stories, solving old puzzles, forgiving hurts, and setting intentions that shaped their waking days. Coyote, always restless, always ready to laugh, found deep peace in knowing that, even when he slept, the world was busy with adventure, healing, and wonder. Dreams became one more territory for him to roam, one more language for him to learn and share, and, just as importantly, another source of mischief to try the next time sleep called everyone home. As Coyote's wisdom deepened and his understanding of the world's hidden languages grew, he began to notice something troubling in the natural rhythms of Turtle Island. The seasons, which had always flowed smoothly from one to the next, were beginning to argue among themselves. Spring arrived too early in some places and too late in others. Summer burned too hot and lingered too long, while autumn rushed through her work, leaving trees confused about when to drop their leaves. Winter, usually content with his time of rest and reflection, began creeping into territories that belonged to his siblings. At first, Coyote thought these irregularities were just the natural variations that made each year unique, but as the disruptions grew more severe, he realized that something deeper was wrong. The seasons. Those ancient spirits who had maintained the world's rhythm since the beginning of time were locked in a bitter dispute that threatened to throw all of Turtle Island into chaos. The trouble began, as such troubles often do, with a misunderstanding that grew into resentment. Spring, the youngest and most eager of the seasoned spirits, had been expanding her influence, bringing warmth and new growth to places that had traditionally belonged to winter. Her enthusiasm was born of love. She wanted to bring life and joy to as many creatures as possible, to extend the time of budding flowers and singing birds. But Winter, ancient and proud, saw this as an invasion of his domain. The long, quiet months of snow and ice were not empty time, he argued, but essential periods of rest and renewal. Without proper winter sleep, the earth could not gather the strength needed for spring's explosion of life. Trees needed their dormant season to prepare for new growth, and animals required the forced quietude of cold months to restore their energy for the active seasons ahead. Summer and autumn found themselves drawn into the conflict, each feeling that their carefully orchestrated contributions were being disrupted. Summer complained that spring's early arrivals made her own heat seem excessive and unwelcome. Autumn grumbled that the confusion over timing made it impossible to properly prepare the world for winter's rest. As the quarrel intensified, the effects became visible across all of Turtle Island. Rivers froze when they should have been flowing freely, causing floods when the ice suddenly melted. Seeds sprouted during false springs, only to be killed by unexpected frosts. Animals became confused about when to migrate, when to hibernate, and when to bear their young. The careful balance that had sustained all life for countless generations was breaking down. The animals and people of Turtle Island looked to Coyote for help, remembering how he had resolved the conflict between the thunder beings and river spirits. But this challenge was more complex than any Coyote had faced before. The seasons were not just powerful spirits. They were fundamental forces that governed the very heartbeat of the world. Their argument threatened not just comfort or convenience, but the basic cycles on which all life depended. Coyote spent many days observing the chaos, trying to understand the root of the problem. He watched as confused bears emerged from hibernation only to find snow still falling. He saw birds setting out on migrations that led them into dangerous storms. He witnessed flowers blooming in winter cold, their beauty doomed to be destroyed by the very forces that should have protected them. Finally, Coyote realized that this situation called for a different kind of intervention than his usual tricks and clever schemes. The season's quarrel was not born of selfishness or malice, but of genuine love and concern for the world. Each season believed deeply in the importance of their role, and each was trying to do what they thought was best for the creatures of Turtle Island. What was needed was not a victory of one season over the others, but a remembering of how they had once worked together in perfect harmony. Coyote would need to help them rediscover the ancient dance that had sustained the world since its creation. Drawing on all the wisdom he had gained from his experiences with fire and flood, sky and river, dreams and shadows, Coyote began to formulate a plan. But this plan would require something new from him, not just cleverness, but genuine leadership. He would need to become not just a mediator, but a teacher, helping the seasons remember what they had forgotten in their anger and confusion. The first step was to bring the seasons together in one place, which was no simple task. Each season existed most powerfully in their own time and domain. Spring lived in the tender green of new growth, summer in the full heat of noon, autumn in the golden light of harvest time, and winter in the deep silence of snow-covered forests. But Coyote remembered the hidden valley where he had once learned from the sky, people, a place that seemed to exist partially outside the normal flow of time. If he could convince the seasons to meet him there, they might be able to encounter each other as equals rather than as competitors fighting over territory. One by one, Coyote visited each season in their strongest moments, speaking to them with the respect and understanding he had learned from his many adventures. He found spring in a meadow where wildflowers were blooming despite patches of snow still lingering in the shade. He discovered summer blazing in a desert canyon at midday. He met autumn in an orchard heavy with ripe fruit, and winter in a mountain grove where icicles hung like crystal bells from ancient pine branches. To each season, he spoke the same message: your gifts are needed and appreciated by all the creatures of Turtle Island, but your siblings' contributions are equally essential. The world is large enough for all of you, wise enough to need all of you, and strong enough to hold all of you in harmony. Will you come to the valley between worlds, where we can speak as equals and remember the ancient dance? The seasons agreed to Coyote's invitation, their curiosity outweighing lingering pride and frustration. In the hidden valley, time seemed to soften. Spring breezes danced beside winter's cool clarity, ripening fruit and autumn leaves mingled with the fragrance of summer wildflowers. For the first time in many cycles, all four seasons looked at one another from a place of peace, not rivalry. Coyote, both respectful and playful, welcomed each of them. Here, outside the ordinary world, we can speak honestly and remember the rhythms that have sustained Turtle Island since the beginning. Let each share what makes them special, and also listen to the beauty of your siblings' gifts. Spring spoke first, youthful and eager. I bring renewal and joy, the first green shoots, songs of returning birds, hope after cold and darkness. Without me, nothing would ever begin. Winter, old and stern but wise, replied, but beginnings require rest. I am the keeper of sleep and stillness, the silence where roots gather strength and dreams are prepared. Without my quiet, the world would exhaust itself. Summer stepped forward, radiant and strong. I am the time of sunlight and abundance, when growth at last bears fruit, when warmth nurtures young and rivers run high. Without me, there would be no sweetness, no celebration. Autumn, golden and reflective, added, but abundance must be harvested. I bring change and gratitude, ceremonies of letting go, preparation for what follows. Without my winding down, the cycle would break and memory would fade. The seasons listened, hearing with fresh understanding. For the first time in ages, their appreciation for one another blossomed alongside their pride in their own gifts. Coyote encouraged a new ritual, one where each season would take a step forward, offer something tangible, flower, icicle, fruit, leaf, and then step back, watching the others build or transform what was given. As the ritual unfolded, the valley itself seemed transformed. Spring's tender shoots merged with winter's woven blankets of snow, producing seeds ready to survive cold. Summer warmed the soil, helping spring's green grow into autumn's harvest. Autumn's falling leaves sheltered sleeping creatures, feeding the soil for another spring. Even winter's deep silence gave space for the celebrations of all. Moved by this unity, the seasons remembered the ancient dance, a slow, beautiful weaving of gifts and rest, growth and reflection. They promised one another to respect boundaries, to offer gratitude at every passing, and to accept the small overlaps where life became richest. Their quarrel melted into laughter, their rivalry into song. Coyote grinned, content with his role not just as trickster but as healer and teacher. Let the world return to its cycles, he said. Let every creature celebrate the arrival and farewell of each season, knowing that what comes is always built on what has just been. From that day forward, the balance returned to Turtle Island. Springs arrived gently, followed by rich summers, thoughtful autumns, and restful winters. Animals and people marked each transition with dances and feasts, tracing circles to remind themselves of the cycle and Coyote's wise mediation. Even during odd years, when the weather played tricks, they trusted that the dance would return and balance would always be found again. Coyote, watchful, mischievous, and wise, knew that every cycle was a chance for new stories, deeper connections, and risks worth taking. The language of the world was pattern and change, and to walk the circle of the seasons was to learn, laugh, and live. With the seasons restored and Turtle Island dancing once more to the rhythm of birth, growth, abundance, and rest, the tale of Coyote the Trickster drew to its gentle close. But this ending, as with all true stories, was really just another beginning. For Coyote remained ever restless, ever creative, ever ready to stir the pot and help the world discover new lessons, joys, and mysteries. Animals and people gathered around fires to hear what he had done. Elders retold the stories of the fire he stole to warm the world, the flood he outwitted to save his friends, the stars he scattered to light the darkness, the rivers and thunder he taught to work together, the music he brought from stones, the moon and its lessons of shadow, the dreams that he helped interpret, and the seasons whose quarrel he transformed into a dance of unity. Some days, children asked where Coyote was now. Maybe he was chasing his tail at the edge of the prairie, or flying with the birds, or tumbling through another hidden adventure in the land between dreams and waking. Perhaps he was present in every moment when cleverness solved a problem, when laughter lightened a heavy heart, when curiosity led someone to see the world in a new way. Wise ones taught that Coyote's spirit lives in the hearts of all who dare to question, who find delight in the unexpected, and who make beauty by joining opposites, trick and truth, mischief and compassion, risk and wisdom. When you see a coyote's scorched tail, remember the price of heroism. When you glimpse a shooting star or hear music where none should be, know that Coyote's paw prints remain. When you look at the world's changing patterns, river and sky, moon and shadow, dream and reality, winter and spring, remember that balance and transformation are the twin gifts he brings. And so, the story continues, told in soft voices by firelight, written in the turning of seasons, sung in dances under the open sky. The story of Coyote is never finished, because Turtle Island itself is never finished. As long as there are tricksters, there will be new adventures. As long as there are listeners, there will be new wisdom woven into the web of life. Coyote, the eternal trickster, remains with us always, reminding us that every puzzle is an invitation, every mistake a lesson, every shadow a place for wonder. The world changes, but Coyote's mischief, laughter, and wisdom endure in every heart that dares to imagine and every spirit that knows. At last, joy is the cleverest trick of all. Good night. Like, comment, and subscribe.